Well, we have an excellent panel to discuss the situation in Algeria now. Nabila Ramdani is a French-Algerian journalist. Sir Jeremy Greenstock is a former UK ambassador to the United Nations. And Bernard Kouchner is a former French foreign minister and also the founder of Médecins Sans Frontières. Thank you very much, all of you, for coming in. Nabila, first of all, I'm just seeing that the El Watan Algerian news agency is saying that the death toll of 23 may be revised upwards. It seems as if the scale of this even surprises the Algerians.
Yes, very much so. But they were very well aware from the beginning that the attack took place on one of the largest gas facilities in the country. So that was always going to involve an awful lot of people because, it's a facility that employs a vast number of people, including Algerians first and foremost. And the temporary assessments that's coming out of Algerian sources that 685 Algerian workers and 107 Western workers have now been released. 32 terrorists have been neutralized, and as you said, 23 people killed so far. But the Algerian authorities are also saying that they captured an awful lot of weapons, including rocket launchers, a stockpile of munitions and including explosive belts and a number of rifle guns and indeed military uniforms worn by the terrorists.
So, first of all, just before we get into that very interesting list that you've just given us, neutralised, does that mean that they have been taken alive or they are now dead? There's that word. It's not one that we necessarily use in this country.
Well, absolutely. It's a slightly ambiguous, and the Algerian authorities have been reluctant to give full information about what's exactly happened because the military operation was still ongoing. Now that the military phase is over, we're expecting them to release perhaps a fuller account and more details about what's happened exactly as expected by Western governments.
That inventory of uniforms and weapons and explosive belts, and indeed we've been hearing from some of the hostages that they had belts of Semtex placed around their necks. Some of those who managed to escaped wearing those things, so it's miraculous and wonderful that they did get away. But it suggests that this was long in the planning and not as a direct response to what was happening in Mali, which was suggested by some of the hostage takers.
Well, I think it's slightly more complicated than that, in the sense that Western gas and oil facilities, especially in this part of the Sahara, are always going to be prime targets for Al-Qaeda related groups, and I think it would be extremely naive to think otherwise. And my view is that this attack against the BP facility might have been planned in the past, but the trigger for it taking place at this particular time was undoubtedly the French intervention in neighboring Mali. The French president said as much. It's no coincidence that it took place in Algeria, with the Algerian president showing open support to the French intervention, even going as far as allowing French jet to use the airspace to share intelligence. And Al-Qaeda is always looking for a spectacular, to put it in rather crude terms, because they're aware that Western governments and indeed media would respond to that.
So Jeremy Greenstock, let's look at the diplomatic side of this. You heard David Cameron earlier on talking about a global problem that had to be dealt with in a global way. But we also heard from our reporter earlier on that there may be a feeling in Algeria that the West were, in a way, treading on toes. I mean, obviously the Algerian authorities have got experience of Al-Qaeda within their patch, and they're saying, well, wait a minute, we know how to deal with this. What's your view on that relationship between Algeria and the West?
Well, the Algerian government has always been extremely sensitive about its own independent action, its own sovereignty. At the UN, they were one of the group of nations that most resisted Western intervention, Western interference in other countries' affairs. And this reaction from the Algerians is, to those who know them, I think entirely predictable and expected. We also have to assess exactly how effective the sort of typical British response to a hostage-taking situation might have been in very different circumstances in the Sahara, with these absolutist jihadists who don't negotiate and have got particular aims in their mind. You were talking just now about whether this was associated with the Mali intervention or not. It's quite clear to me that this was the trigger, and indeed as far back as last November, the leadership of this subgroup of Al-Qaeda-linked cells in the Sahara were warning the French not to invade in Mali, and this has been long prepared with that in mind. But of course, the Prime Minister has been referring to the global jihadist approach on this, because there is so much ungoverned space in the Sahara where the sovereign nations like Mali don't have the security capacity to deal with huge empty pieces of territory with weak security forces. We are going to see other instances of ungoverned space being used by jihadists, and this will have been, to some extent, an inspiration, might have been more of an inspiration if it had been successful, to other groups in other areas, including Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, maybe even the Philippines, East Africa, Somalia, Yemen. There are all sorts of places where this kind of operation can be conceived, and the jihadists are trying now to produce this on a larger scale than the Osama bin Laden-centered type of cell-based terrorism that we experienced in the last decade.
I mean, we've heard about the fact that the threat must be linked with the specific region. It goes without saying Al-Qaeda is a growing threat in North Africa, but it's not organised as a whole, is it? There's lots of disparate groups who have slightly different aims. Is that impossible to police?
Yes, the larger group we've been watching in the Northern Sahara, Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, was not actually the particular group that seems to have done this operation under Belmokhtar. That's a separate organization called the Movement for Oneness and Jihad in West Africa, which probably affects also Mauritanian territory, may even stretch down to northern Nigeria. These cells are beginning to operate independently. The Al-Qaeda franchise, if you like, is very separate in different areas and different regions, and there's a lot of vociferousness amongst particular leaderships. They go after their own aims, but with a similar jihadist, extremist Islam interpretation of what they're doing politically. So these things can pop up anywhere in various forms.
Bernard Kouchner is listening to all of this. He was French Foreign Minister from 2007 till 2010 in President Sarkozy's government, also founded Médecins Sans Frontières. Was there anything that more that could have been done, that should have been done, to limit the activities of Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb?
Certainly, yes, but to develop, they are also suffering of poverty. Not only jihadism, of course, I completely share what Jeremy Greenstock just talked about, but they are also in this land of Sahel, Sahel, very, very, very poor. And we didn't try enough. We, who are we? I mean, everybody, including Europe, European Union, and of course France, etc. We didn't try enough to develop the scholarship, the schools, even the food. So some of them are tempted by Islamism. But let me come back to what you have said about the Algerian operation, please, on 3 points. First, we don't know exactly what happened. Because, the Algerian security forces are not very keen to talk to the press, and there is no witness, and etc. Second, the Algerian security forces, police and special forces, they are absolutely aware about the method of the terrorists. Don't forget that Algerians went to war, a civil war, a very bloody and difficult civil war during years and years. And of course they have the experience. They were very brutal. Some compare this method with the Russian method. But what was possible to do? What was possible how to save the people without giving a very big shock? And our Algerian friend, they are insisting on the high number of the Algerian and the foreigners which have been saved.
Yes. On the issue, I think it's clear that all of you agree that Mali was the trigger. Even if this was something that was planned in advance, Mali is the thing. The intervention of France in Mali is a thing that has triggered what has happened at this gas plant. And you, Mr. Kouchner, have been very critical of Great Britain and just how much help Britain gave to your country, France, in Mali. Why is that, and what more did you want, David David Cameron to do?
Because, madam, we are fighting all together our common enemy is extremism, jihadism. And the British people targeted, the French were targeted, the Spanish were targeted, etc., etc. So I expect, but this is not the aim, a real common fight against this real common enemy. This is a cause commune. That's why I believe that in Europe, not only the Brits, of course, the German people and the Spanish and the Italian and all the others, not only in terms of material, war material, but in terms of if you want to start developing a humanitarian project, it's okay too. But let's be together. We were not surprised by this attack. And it was not this attack on this is the first attack on an energy site in Algeria at this scale, and it has been prepared from far. This is not because of Mali. And Mali, what was Mali? It was the beginning of telling these jihadists, telling these barbarian people, it's enough. And they were getting down to Bamako, where we supposed to get a real terrorist state. It was impossible. And we hacked, the French, in the name of the international community, Security Council, etc. So I'm still hoping that our European partners and European friends will be with us together in backing the Malian army, in backing the African people. This is not up to us to eradicate the terrorism and the jihadism in this part of Africa. This is up to the African people.
Okay.
So Jeremy Greenstock, listening to what Bernard Kouchner said there about, Western European involvement is necessary, yet what you were saying earlier on is actually the Algerians may not welcome that at all.
Well, the Algerians won't, but the weaker countries in the sub-Saharan, sub-Saharan area will need Western help to develop their own security capacity. And I entirely agree with Bernard Kouchner that we've got to act together on this. This is a growing threat with the weapons that have spilt out of Libya, where both France and the UK were absolutely shoulder to shoulder on what we did in Libya. But the weapons that leaked out have increased the military capacity of these jihadists. We do have to work together. Occasionally in Africa, France and the UK decide to split tasks. We took on Sierra Leone. The French have had a huge challenge in Côte d'Ivoire. In Niger and other places, we divide tasks. Where the French have been the colonialists in the past, they tend to be more involved, and likewise with us in, say, East Africa. So we divide it up. We talk to each other. We plan with each other. And I think Bernard is absolutely right that we've got to take this very seriously on a European-wide and NATO-wide basis and start doing these things properly.
Well, does that mean, Nabila, that your region will welcome some kind of united force?
Yes.
Let's ask our Algerian guest. How will the people of Algeria, of Mali, react if they see blue helmets on the ground?
Well, I think this will have huge consequences in the region. I think both Bernard Kouchner and Sir Jeremy Greenstock are right to highlight the very real threat of Al-Qaeda in that part of the world and their ability to operate in vast areas where borders are extremely porous and, as has been highlighted, often weak governments are struggling to control well-organized and very well-funded organizations. But I think Bernard Kouchner is slightly disingenuous as to the real objectives pursued by the French. It's much more than that. A week before the French intervention in Mali, we heard François Hollande saying that he was effectively going to put an end to what is called the France-Afrique policy in Africa, meaning that, putting an end to effectively France's regular backup of controversial figures like President Traoré, who, let's not forget, that, he heads an illegitimate government who came out of a coup. And he also, François Hollande, promised to reduce the number of French troops stationed in Africa in countries like the Ivory Coast, Chad or the Central African Republic. Up to 5,000 troops are present in that part of the world. Kouchner was talking about the lack of education and schools. Well, clearly the investment has been prioritize to go into military infrastructures. And, France has led more than 50 military operations over 50 years in that part of the world. Crucially, and let's not be naive about that, the intervention in Mali is also justified by the French because they look at the situation in those terms. The fall of the government in Mali could affect Senegal, which is a rather stable democracy, but more importantly Nigeria, which is one of the biggest oil exporters.
Let Bernard Kouchner, I mean, you put something serious at Bernard Kouchner's feet. Yeah, let him come back. Very briefly, Bernard Kouchner.
Well, I know that the Franco-Algerian relations have a long story behind, and I know why. This is not easy, but we need all together, not the French. We need all to work with Algeria. Algeria is the main country in the area. And of course you were right in telling us that there is no stable government in Bamako and was a coup, etc. Okay, but in the same time you are just evocating the souvenir of France-Afrique. But if we were still under this, let's say, feeling and geopolitical France-Afrique movement, we have been the first to intervene in Mali to stop the coup d'etat. We didn't do that. It was not our fault, but we had a friend in Mali, a very good friend of us, Algerian and French. It was Amédou Toumani Touré. He was a stable and a democratic president for a long period of time.
Okay.
Unfortunately, now that's right that the government in Bamako is not a very representative government, but where we suppose, is that true, that where we supposed to wait for a stable government to stop the getting down to the south of the jihadists, cutting the hands, imposing Sharia? This is not possible to accept, not at all.
Bernard Kouchner, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. So you also heard from Sir Jeremy Greenstock and Nabila Ramdani. Thank you very much indeed.